My name is David Schneiderman, and among other things, I'm on the board of Neyot Kedemim, the Biblical Landscape Museum and World in Israel. I'm here to introduce Asaf Shamis. Asaf graduated from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, where he earned his bachelor's degree in political science and international relations. By the way, magna cum laude. And a master's in political science, also magna cum laude. He holds a master's of philosophy and political science from the City University of New York Graduate Center, where he is currently in the last stages of writing his doctoral dissertation. Mr. Shamis has published works on the history of political thought, the history of Zionism, and on Israeli politics. In the past 3 years, Asaf has also been teaching courses in political science at Hunter College, the City College of New York, and Queens College. We welcome Asaf, who will speak to us about anti-Semitism, Zionism, and the Jewish question, and the early Zionist thinkers and how they responded to and dealt with the problems of anti-Semitism. Asaf.
So good morning to everyone. I'd like to add to Professor Goldhagen's perspective with harking back to history and looking at the way the founders of Zionism saw anti-Semitism. I'd like to focus specifically on the political Zionists. And when I'm saying political Zionists, I mean Max Nordau, Israel Zangwill, and of course Theodor Herzl, among others. I believe that looking at how the first political Zionists saw anti-Semitism may provide us with an interesting insight about the latest globalized stage of anti-Semitism. So let's begin, and I want to begin by talking about the Jewish question. So both Zionism and anti-Semitism were originally ideological reactions to what was known in the 19th century as the Jewish question. Now, without going into too much details, the Jewish question referred to the debate about the legal and civil status of Jews in Europe after emancipation at the end of the 18th century. Now, as long as the feudal order remained in place and Jews were living in ghettos, there was no question about their status. Jews, in most cases, were a segregated community of non-citizens. Despite brief moments of cultural and religious freedom, Jews were discriminated and persecuted. Yet the European Enlightenment of the 18th century carried the promise of liberating the Jews from cultural and religious determinism. During the following century, the modern nation-states, which were based on the ideas of equal citizenship and universal rights, granted Jews equal legal status and civil liberties. Yet the promise of Jewish emancipation gave rise to a new quandary. If Jews are to be considered as full members of the new homogenized national cultures, should they retain their Jewish identity? How can they both be French, German, or Austrian and Jewish? How can Jews enter into the non-Jewish society as Jews? Now, that was the crux of the Jewish question. Now, the Jewish question was far from being a parochial question. It was part of a larger struggle about the face of the European modern nation state. In each case, the answer to the Jewish question became central to the debate about the nature of the nation state. The Jew became the significant other, if you like, through which and against which modern European national identities were shaped. This was best exhibited, of course, in the Dreyfus Affair, which almost drove the French Third Republic to a civil war. Now, it was against this backdrop that anti-Semitism and Zionism emerged in the last decades of the 19th century as two novel but opposite solutions to the Jewish question. Now, let's turn first to anti-Semitism. We use this term a lot. Obviously, this morning we use it a lot. But let's try to locate it in its original historical context. So while modern anti-Semitism has its roots in the old religious prejudice against Jews, it is a modern phenomenon in its very nature. Anti-Semitism secularizes, rationalizes, and politicizes the traditional theological Judophobia. In the modern anti-Semitic mind, Jewishness is no longer a faith, but a racial category, one which could be measured, observed, and classified. Anti-Semitism transforms traditional anti-Judaism into a rational ideology entrenched in science and biology. The new anti-Semitic movements which emerged in the last decades of the 19th century saw Jewishness as literally inscribed on the Jew's body, language, and patterns of behavior. Since the anti-Semites believed that, unlike Judaism, Jewishness cannot be discarded, their solution to the Jewish question was plain and simple: get rid of the Jews. Now, another thing that characterized the modern anti-Semitic movements were their political nature. Ever since the 1870s, anti-Semitism moved from being a fringe movement in terms of politics to the center of European parliamentary politics. As time went by, anti-Semitic parties gained more and more electoral votes. Now, the founders of modern Zionism had many different ideas but they all shared one particular view. Hess, Pinsker, Nordau, and Herzl, among others, all identified early on anti-Semitism as an existential threat to Jews. Today, this seems perhaps trivial or commonplace. Yet back then, in pre-Holocaust times, the majority of Jews saw anti-Semitism as little more than a passing threat. The Zionists were the first to point to the grave danger anti-Semitism poses to European Jewry. Now, what explains the ability of the first Zionists to identify the dangers of anti-Semitism was not their Jewish identity, but on the contrary, it was their assimilated nature or background. Almost all the founders of Zionism were thoroughly assimilated Jews. They were all products of European education and culture. As this was the case, they took the emergence of anti-Semitism to heart. It rattled their world. They felt that Europe had betrayed them. Now, the particular encounter between thoroughly assimilated Jews and modern anti-Semitism gave rise to a novel and groundbreaking solution to the Jewish question. While we saw that in post-emancipation Europe, Jews faced a dilemma either to assimilate into the general society or maintain their Jewish identity, political Zionism offered a third way. The political Zionists, headed by Herzl, believed that while a Jewish person might not be able to enter European society as a Jewish state might be able to enter the family of nation as a Jewish nation. They thought that, and Herzl thought that, what is impossible for Jews to accomplish as individuals, they might be able to achieve as a nation. There is a common misconception about what political Zionism was originally about. Political Zionism is often viewed as an ideological reaction to following the emergence of anti-Semitism, calling for separating the Jews from Europe and establishing a Jewish state. Yet this is not quite accurate. The objective of political Zionism was to solve the question. The first Zionists sought to do so by allowing the Jews to join collectively the family of nations. For them, a Jewish state was not simply an asylum from anti-Semitism, but a way for Jews both to maintain their Jewish identity as well as to secure their right for self-determination. They believed that once the Jewish state will live in peace with the nations of the world, only then anti-Semitism will wither away. Now, the question to be asked today is, were the founders of political Zionism right? Did the Jewish state solve the Jewish question? Did it prove to be useful in the fight against anti-Semitism? On the face of things, I would say the state of Israel did provide a solution to the Jewish question. Jews no longer have to choose either to be part of a non-Jewish polity or retain their Jewish identity. While many still prefer to live outside of Israel and thus still are confronted by the Jewish question in its various forms, after 1948, every Jew has the option of becoming a member of the Jewish state. It is this option that makes Israel important, so important to all Jews, no matter where they choose to live. Yet, if Israel provided a solution to the Jewish question, how come anti-Semitism is still growing strong? The answer I wish to put forward here today is that anti-Semitism is still alive and kicking because Zionism did not really solve the Jewish question, but in fact, it shifted it to the international arena. While in the past the question was in what way the Jewish person could enter the general society and maintain his Jewish identity, today it is how Israel could be accepted by the international community and remain a Jewish state. The sad fact is that contrary to the first Zionist hopes, today, almost 66 years after the establishment of the State of Israel, large parts of the international community still find it hard to accept Israel as a Jewish state. The reason for this, in my view, is that Zionism did not really solve the Jewish question in the first place, but transported it to the international stage. The tension between the Jewish person and Gentile society transforms nowadays into the uneasy relations between the Jewish state and the nations of the world. In the globalized world of the 21st century, the Jewish state takes the role of the other, the pariah, once occupied by the Jewish individual. Once we recognize the presence of the Jewish question in its latest globalized form, we understand why Israel is the only country in the world that in some circles it is acceptable, even praiseworthy, to advocate for its destruction. We realize while other countries commit loathsome atrocities, only when it comes to Israel, the question of its existence is still on the table. I believe that the reason for this is that today we are witnessing the globalized incarnation of the age-old Jewish question. Now, I would like to conclude by two short comments. First, against those who argue that there is no connection between anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli sentiments, I argue that the two are intrinsically linked. Both are expressions of the unresolved Jewish question. At the bottom of both rests the reluctance to admit Jews as Jews into the non-Jewish world. While in the past the reluctance was directed towards Jewish individuals, today it is directed towards the Jewish state. This is, of course, not to say that all critiques of Israel are anti-Semitic. Sure enough, like any other country, over the years Israel pursued some questionable policies that deserved scrutiny. The fact that the anti-Semitic devil is still alive does not mean it is everywhere. Yet when Israel is labeled as an apartheid state, when Zionism is equated with Nazism, when some leaders call for wiping Israel off the map, those positions all manifest the persistence of the classic Jewish question. The subtext in all these instances is the unwillingness to accept Jewish autonomy in all its forms. My second and final remark relates to the lessons we can draw from the discussion here as to the future of Zionism and anti-Semitism. The remarkable achievements of the Zionist project in building up a thriving Jewish society leads us to overlook the fact that Zionism did not fulfill its initial promise. It did not solve the Jewish question, nor did it eradicate anti-Semitism. Today, the task at hand is the same one that the first Zionists faced 2 centuries ago, to provide a solution to the Jewish question. To find a way Israel will be accepted by all nations as a Jewish state. While this is a mission far beyond the reach of Israel alone, it is up to us, Jews inside and outside of Israel, to find a way to reconcile our commitment to preserving Israel as a Jewish state while upholding its universal, liberal, democratic nature. Doing so will be the best way to ensure that the anti-Semitic devil will finally die. I'll be happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Asaf. And we have some questions. Yes.
Is it on? Yeah. So you're at City University. You're at City University, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what do you do to see? I feel that the youth, people in general, I don't understand why the Jews are doing absolutely nothing and sitting still. What do you do at the university to promote this? The fact that Jews have to stand up for themselves. They have to speak up. How do you reach the Jewish population? How do you reach all the children, the youth, other than, of course, in your classes?
Right.
And I will comment and say one thing. When the first bomb went off many years ago during the High Holy Days, I remember we must have called a dozen organizations because the New York Times wrote a very derogatory article about the bombing, as if it was our fault. And we called all these organizations. It was the first time it happened, and we said, please don't have all your congregations, they're all going to be in synagogue. Have them all not by the New York Times. Not one person said they would.
Yeah.
Otherwise, right.
Yeah. Well, I would say that the challenge is not to reach the Jewish population on campuses, but I think the biggest challenge is to reach the non-Jewish populations on campus. And this is something I'm personally trying to do, and this is something which is difficult to do. In courses I teach, I try to clarify or to explain to my students why Israel must be defined as a Jewish state and why this is something that is imperative because of this historical context I just explained. I think this is something that for non-Jews, it's very difficult for them to understand. So if I'm doing anything, is trying to explain this context to non-Jewish populations in the university. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here myself. My name is Lisa Pollack, and I'm the PR director for my congregation, Congregation La Doverdour in Little Neck. And I also play a major part on our Israel Advocacy Committee. And just recently, I found a really disturbing article, which I don't know if you've been teaching your students this or you're making them aware, but there's a new thing. It's actually a terrifying new trend. It's called the knockout game. Okay, I don't know. And according to the media, they assume that it's not anti-Semitic. And the percentage on this is higher for Jews being attacked than any other group. So what do you do in this case? How do you fight the media?
Well, it's hard for me to speak as someone who comes from academia. How do you fight the media? My answer, which probably is the expected one, is by education. That's the only thing I can contribute myself. And I think if we educate our children to understand, again, the historical complexities that are at stake here, so I think those kind of, losum phenomenon will fade away. But I think also that, and this is also something I try to emphasize, that our limits to battle those, phenomenon are limited. We're just one community, and we're just individuals. And even if we have a congregation behind us, this is a much more broader and historical phenomenon that we can handle. So, we do only what we can.
We have a question over here. Oh, you have someone over here. Okay.
Relatively young. You said you want to reach the non-Jews on campus.
Yeah.
As someone who's a college student, who has at Penn, yes, who has dealt also when he went to Rutgers with the Students for Justice of Palestine and all of their organizations. What's the best way to combat, for lack of a better term, the lies that they put out against Israel and they have on the streets and with the rallies? How would you go on how would you come back against that if if you're trying to, attract non-Jews and to get them to see the better side of Israel?
Yeah. Well, maybe, if I'll tell you about my personal story. I came here to the United States to write my PhD on political philosophy. I wasn't interested in Jewish affairs or Zionism or whatever. However, once I encountered those, those things that happen on campus, I decided to dedicate my work to Zionism and to the study of the history of anti-Semitism. And again, I'll give you the same answer that I gave just now. I think that educating people about the history is the most important thing, certainly in the academic scene. I don't think that going and making demonstrations for Israel is necessarily the smartest thing to do. I think that just educating people and having a conversation that includes people from all walks of life, from all parts of the political sphere, that's the most important thing. Because what's happening in campus is that you have two camps, those who are against Israel and those who are in favor of Israel, and the two are completely separated. There's no conversation. So if I would suggest anything, is trying to make this conversation happen between those two groups.
I'm interested why you use talk about the Zionist movement in the past tense, when on the screen it shows that we're from the American Zionist Movement and the World Zionist Organization, and the point being that the WZO still exists, still has as its core fighting for Israel and fighting anti-Semitism, and I'm interested to know what you would think we should do as Zionists to solve the problem.
Well, it's a tough question. I'm talking about the Zionist movement in the past. It's, my mistake because my research is on Herzl and on the Zionist movement and the First Congress of 1897 and so forth. Again, I think that, getting to the populations that usually are not being engaged with, this is, I think, the most important things. If it's like the Latino population or the African American population, those are the communities, I think, that do not really hear about Israel. And if they do, they hear a lot of what Professor Goldhagen talked about. So, outreaching for them, I think, would be the smartest thing to do.
I just want to identify myself for the purposes of the conversation. My name is Dan Mondro. I live in Edison, New Jersey, which is about a 5-minute drive from Rutgers University. So I want to address issues on campus. Several years ago, Natan Sharansky came to speak on campus at Rutgers, and a Palestinian woman who was a student at the school threw a pie in his face. Yeah. It was after that 4 Jewish groups on campus mobilized in order to increase Jewish awareness and to counteract the strong lobbying effort among the left-wing elements on campus, and that means both students and professors on campus. And it has been effective. So to borrow a phrase from Donald Rumsfeld, this is a case of complacency is a provocation. And with all due respect to you, I don't think that trying to bring the two groups together, which are diametrically opposed, is necessarily effective. What is effective, and what is taking place not just at Rutgers, and I hope at City College, of which I'm a graduate, by the way, I think that by raising Jewish awareness and demonstrating and creating publicity, and by engaging Jewish students who otherwise might not be identified either with Judaism or with Zionism, that is probably the best way to proceed in terms of addressing that problem.
I agree.
Rack?
We have someone.
Van Soutane, Long Beach, New York. One of the problems that I see it, you're here in New York City.
Yeah.
You're doing your work here in New York City.
That's true.
Where all of the student population, whether they're anti-Semitic, not anti-Semitic, they've had contact with Jews. So every one of us have contact with all of the minorities, and we draw our own little conclusions. We might say, oh, well, they're really not that bad. this or that. But that's not where the vast majority is here in New York City of the anti-Semitism on the campuses. It's basically the rest of the United States. When you go west of Pennsylvania until you get to California, you can count the number of Jews on campuses maybe on 2 or 3 hands. And all of a sudden you get Palestinian supporters, and you get the few Jews, as Danny said a minute ago, that aren't really concerned. They're not going to come out and say, well, I'm a Jew, and why are you doing this? That was a statement.
I would tell you that at Tulane in New Orleans, there's a very active group, and we are a small city with a small Jewish community, but we are not ignorant of the problem, nor are we immune to it. Mort?
Thank you. My name is Morton Klein. I'm president of the WZO-AZM Zionist Organization of America. I speak at campuses all over the country. At Columbia, Brown, Yale, and Brandeis, after giving a lecture on anti-Semitism in the Islamic Arab world, with quotes, references, when and who said what, at those 4 campuses, not only during the lecture was I attacked as a racist, but in articles in the papers following my lecture, many letters they published calling me a racist for simply telling the truth of what Arabs and Muslims are saying against Jews in Israel. And that includes, by the way, Hillel leaders. Hillel leaders also signed their letters attacking me as well. My question is, how do you explain when somebody simply factually, with references, explaining what people say in the Arab Islamic world, that students have the chutzpah, have the absurd chutzpah to call this racist when I'm just describing the racism? What is your understanding as to why students respond this way? I'm too old to understand this.
No, but you finally learned to ask a question.
You want to answer that?
Well, again, I was amazed as, like you, exactly like you when I came here, and, I saw people that advocate for allegedly progressive politics, and while in practice they have like an anti-Semitic opinion that they just propagate. Again, I think it's a broader issue, and I think it goes to the media, and I think it goes to history, and I think it's something that as individuals we don't really we can't really do anything. However, I do think that engaging those people is useful. I do think so. I'm feeling a little bit like Obama in the Geneva Accord, trying to convince, but I think that engaging them, last semester I had 5 Muslim students in my class that, some of them were highly hostile to me as an Israeli, but at the end of the year, I think we had some kind of conversation, and I really think I managed to reach them. I don't think that they agree with me, but at least we had something going on there, and I think this is, could be a start for something bigger.
2 more questions.
I would like to just say something. And this is a general answer. It surely isn't the solution. It seems to me, and I remember this years ago, I had a business, and we visit Israel all the time. On one of my trips to Israel, some of the people in my store that I had said, David, you're always going to Israel, and Israel's always in the news. It's such a big place. What size is it? Is it the size of the Soviet Union? That was in the days before Russia. And I looked at him, I said, are you kidding me? Israel is this big. In that time, there were maybe 3.5 million Jews in Israel. And that's what occurs to me. And this is something we have to always think of. Whenever we talk, whenever we do any kind of discussion about Israel, we should have a big map behind us. And the map should show everybody and then us. That's what we are. Because really, the conception is different. The New York Times, Google something about the New York Times. How often does Israel or Jew show up in the New York Times? Every day. What's the question? I'm just saying that's what we have to do. And everywhere you go, put up that map. Take that map with you.
So my question to you is, I know you spend a great deal of time in your scholarly endeavors, and we certainly all commend you for that. In my humble experience, actually, many non-lovers of Israel, non-Israelophiles, are actually extremely educated in their history. Right. And I think that for a lot of Jewish people, that's a real weakness that we have. I can say, as someone who has Jewish schooled all of my children, I don't think that their knowledge of Jewish history is particularly strong. I don't think it's been emphasized in their education, and I think that one thing that happens, and I do have 2 college student children, and I think that one thing that does happen to them on the campus is that when they are approached by other individuals who are much more educated in history than they are, they're not in as strong a position to counter some of that. So my question to you is, I think it's great that you are, researching the history. Do you feel that, at least on the part of City University or other academic institutions, that there is support for making some of this information current in such a way that it lives and breathes to people who care so much as the people in this room today?
No. I think my answer is definitely no. There isn't such an effort. And this is how it is. Maybe in Jewish studies program there is. I'm a political scientist, so, but no, there isn't such an effort. And, I'll be happy to be part of such an effort when, the college administration will, make the step. But no. And it's unfortunate.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
very much.